Following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, we are bringing you an extended edition of OS. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to OS with James Reynolds, live from the BBC. King Charles I has arrived here in London. The country's new monarch flew down from Balmoral in Scotland. The King, along with Camilla, the new Queen Consort, shook hands with well-wishers outside Buckingham Palace. One even reached over and gave him a kiss on the cheek. The royal couple walked slowly along the gates of the palace, the new Queen a customary half-step behind the King. They stopped to look at cards written in sympathy for the death yesterday of Queen Elizabeth II. As the new King entered the palace, the royal standard was flown from the roof. It is the only flag in the country which will currently be flown at full mast. And it is a striking sight. One sovereign dies, then the new sovereign begins the next reign without pause. On this programme, we will continue to reflect on the life of Elizabeth II and the reign of the new King.
Hello, this is Julie Candler with the BBC News. Britain's new King, Charles III, has been greeted by large crowds outside Buckingham Palace on his return to London from Scotland after the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. There were shouts of God Save the King as he shook hands with members of the public. King Charles has held his first audience with Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Later, he'll be giving his first televised address to the nation as monarch. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell says the new king has been preparing for his role as head of state for many years.
I think he will indicate that he will be the kind of monarch to which we have become accustomed over the past 70 years. He has made it clear that he fully understands and appreciates the discipline, the constraints, the circumspection that is absolutely required of the monarch within a constitutional monarchy. He's shrewd enough to know where the boundary line is.
Events of mourning and commemoration for Queen Elizabeth are well underway. At midday, church bells rang out across the United Kingdom. Then there were gun salutes with 96 rounds fired, one for each year of her life. Parliament has been holding a special session of condolence. There's been a cascade of global tributes to Queen Elizabeth. President Biden described her as a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. The White House confirmed that Mr. Biden would attend the funeral. China's President Xi Jinping noted that she had been the first British monarch to visit his country and called her death a great loss. Emperor Naruhito of Japan said the Queen had impressed many people by always wishing for peace and tranquility in the world. And President Macron of France spoke of her wisdom and empathy.
In her, I have known a great head of state, a unique example of her devotion to her people, and a very close ally. To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen. To us all, she would be with us forever.
Many sporting events in Britain have been called off as a mark of respect for the Queen. All football matches over the weekend have been postponed. Boxing, rugby union and horse racing are among the other sports affected. There was no play in today's cricket test match between England and South Africa, but it will resume on Saturday. The England captain, Ben Stokes, said the Queen had loved sport. World news from the BBC. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has described the floods in Pakistan as a climate catastrophe. Speaking in Islamabad, Mr. Guterres said that helping Pakistan to recover from the disaster caused by climate change was not a matter of generosity but of justice. The head of the United Nations Atomic Agency, Rafael Grossi, has warned the situation at Ukraine's Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is increasingly precarious. Mr. Grossi said that nearby military activity had critically threatened the plant's crucial power supply. Bethany Bell has more details.
Mr. Grossi said shelling had caused a complete power blackout in the city of Enerhodar, compromising the safety of the Zaporizhia nuclear plant and its staff. He said the plant operator was not confident that reliable off-site power could be restored and was considering switching off the remaining reactor. That would make the nuclear plant totally reliant on emergency diesel generators. Mr. Grossi said this was a dramatic development which significantly increased the risk of a nuclear accident.
A Russian-backed official in occupied Ukraine has admitted the Ukrainian troops have scored a significant victory this week. Ukrainian troops claim to have advanced up to 50 kilometers into Russian-held territory. This would put them within striking distance of Kupiansk, a strategically important town. More than 800 migrants expelled by Algeria have reached the town of Agadez in northern Niger. Local officials in Niger say they include more than 70 unaccompanied children. In recent years, Algeria has expelled tens of thousands of migrants. Chinese scientists have found a new mineral on the moon. Analysis of rock samples retrieved by China's recent Chang'e 5 mission revealed crystalline structures that have been confirmed as a totally new mineral deposit. BBC News.
James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC. The reign of King Charles III has begun. Bells rang out at St Paul's Cathedral, in Windsor and in Westminster Abbey, and gun salutes took place across the country to mark the passing of the King's mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, who died yesterday in Balmoral. The new King flew from Aberdeen down here to London, where he greeted crowds outside Buckingham Palace. He shook hands, he looked at cards, and he has now held his first audience with Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. A little later, the new King will deliver his first televised address to the nation as the new head of state. With me in the studio is our correspondent Naomi Grimley. Naomi, for years and years, this country and other countries knew him as the Prince of Wales, always the heir to the throne, but not on the throne itself. Now, for the last few hours, we have seen him on the throne. What has this country learned about what kind of king he wants to be?
Well, he says himself it's the longest apprenticeship in history to be a king. And I think you already saw this afternoon when he arrived at Buckingham Palace, there was genuine affection from the crowd. At one point, one woman leaned up and kissed him on the cheek. He saw the detective branch surrounding him, a bit worried about that, but it passed off fine, and there were also shouts and singing of God Save the King. And it's getting your head around that change, because that song has always been God Save the Queen, so now singing it with different lyrics is a bit of a reality check for the nation.
I got on the tube this morning and there was a poster printed by the authorities. I think it's in every tube station, and it says, "It is with great sorrow we've learned of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The sign says, we have sent our deepest sympathy to His Majesty the King and all members of the royal family." And when I saw that for the moment, I thought, king? What king? We don't have a king. And it then dawned on me that we do now have a king, and I think it is going to take people some time to adapt. And what I wanted to do a little earlier on was see what things are like on the streets. So I took the walk from Broadcasting House, which is just off Regent Street, down towards Buckingham Palace. It's about a half-hour walk to take in the atmosphere on the streets of the capital. The first thing that strikes you when you walk through the streets of central London is that all the shops are open. People are going about their business. Life almost looks normal. But then every once in a while, every couple of blocks, you realise that things are different.
That the Elizabethan era has come to an end. And as I've made my way into the centre of the town, I'm standing in Piccadilly Circus. There is a giant digital billboard of the Queen smiling. And it simply says, Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II, 1926 to 2022. I'm approaching the palace now, and I don't know if you can hear that boom in the background of the guns saluting the Queen in nearby Hyde Park. Excuse me, I wonder if I could ask you for your thoughts on why you've come here today? Yeah, of course. Just, it's going to be moving, isn't it?
Yeah. We brought a Paddington Bear card with our flowers from my daughter's garden as something that this 4.5-year-old will remember, we hope. It has been part of all of our lives for the entirety of our lives.
Your name, please.
Anita. I'm Lucy.
Tell me your thoughts about coming here today outside Buckingham Palace.
Oh, we were just saying, like, what a coincidence it was for us to be in London today. Yeah. So unexpected to hear that. She's been there through everything. Like, my grandparents have always loved her and looked up to her, and same with everyone.
Can I ask your name, please?
Gloria.
You've got 2 young kids in buggies here.
Yes.
They're probably going to be too young to remember.
Yes, but at least they can reflect later I can tell them stories of what happened today. And that is something that I wanted them to actually experience that.
My name is TJ.
You've written a card here. Can you read it out?
Your Majesty, thank you. We will miss you. It's a Zahidi family. It's like the owner of the house is missing now. It felt like it's her home.
I've just taken a few more steps towards the palace and then standing a few meters in front of the railings. There are the traditional guards in their red uniforms and their Busby hats marching. There are people standing here near the railing. Some have attached flowers and cards, and others are standing and taking photos. Can I ask you your name, please?
It's Chris.
I'm Victoria.
And you're with your 2 daughters?
2 daughters, yes.
Yeah. From South Africa.
It's quite heartbreaking. I feel like I'm on the verge of tears all day. I feel like I've lost a grandmother.
Can I ask your name, please?
Mary Reid. Very emotional. She's been my queen all my life, and hey, it's been an emotional day. And we were here yesterday when the announcement was made at Buckingham Palace, so we were totally shocked. So we've just come to pay our respects.
The thoughts of some of those who'd gone to lay flowers at the gates of Buckingham Palace. I was down there a few hours ago, and shortly after I left, the new king arrived and shook hands with some of those people who were outside the palace. Naomi Grimley, our correspondent, is still with me. Take us through what happens in the next few hours.
Well, in about an hour, we're going to hear from King Charles himself. He'll deliver his first televised address to the nation, and you can hear that on BBC World Service. At around that time as well, there'll also be a service beginning at St Paul's Cathedral. Now, this will see readings from the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. There'll also be blessings from the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's going to be a service of remembrance for the dead Queen. There'll be a muffled bell tolling at the start of the service and then a muffled peal at the end of the service. And that's another way that traditionally British churches have shown their respect for dead monarchs.
And it's interesting, Naomi, isn't it, that even though the Queen is gone, that she's died, immediately the new king takes office. The royal standard flies from Buckingham Palace at full mast because there is always a sovereign. Here's Priya Sippy and the OS team to tell us a bit more about Britain's new king.
As of yesterday, Charles Philip Arthur George, the Queen's eldest son, has become King Charles III. Now 73, the new king was born at Buckingham Palace in London in 1948 and became heir to the throne in 1952 at just 4 years old, when his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, was crowned following the death of her father, King George VI. Going against royal tradition, Charles attended schools in London and Scotland, instead of being privately tutored at home. In 1969, Charles assumed the title Prince of Wales, a traditional title which is bestowed by the sovereign. Shortly after, he graduated from the University of Cambridge with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Archaeology and Anthropology. After his studies, Charles spent the next few years serving in both the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force. He married Lady Diana Spencer in 1981, who became the Princess of Wales. And the couple had 2 sons, William and Harry. Charles currently has 5 grandchildren by both of his sons. Charles and Diana announced their separation in 1992, and several years later Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris. The divorce and death of Diana caused much controversy for Charles. Several years after her death, Charles went public with his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, and in 2005 the two got married and Camilla became known as the Duchess of Cornwall. Now Camilla, at age 75, has the title of Queen Consort, which is the traditional name of the wife of a reigning king. As the longest-serving Prince of Wales, Charles spearheaded a number of initiatives and charitable work over the years, including the Prince's Trust, a leading youth charity. And he has long campaigned for action on climate change, championing global sustainability. Some have criticized him in the past for being too overtly political. However, he has said he will change his approach to politics once he becomes king.
The idea somehow that I'm going to go on exactly the same way, if I have to succeed, is complete nonsense, because the two situations are completely different.
He currently lives in Clarence House in London. However, he is expected to move into Buckingham Palace now that he is king.
Priya Sippy from the OS team, and in fact, King Charles and Queen Camilla did move into Buckingham Palace an hour or two ago. They walked through the gates alone, greeted by guards, and that royal standard flew from the roof of Buckingham Palace. This is OS on the BBC with me, James Reynolds, live from our studio in central London. Let's take a look now at some of the other stories which are making the news. North Korea has declared itself to be a nuclear weapons state. The country's leader, Kim Jong-un, called the decision irreversible and ruled out the possibility of any talks on denuclearization. The Global Nuclear Agency has warned the situation at Ukraine's Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is increasingly precarious, with increased shelling making it unlikely that power could be restored. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN watchdog, said that the power infrastructure feeding the nearby city of Enerhodar has been destroyed. And Hong Kong has taken a first step towards easing its tough COVID rules for airlines, which have damaged the territory's role, as a hub for international flights. The government says that from Saturday, quarantine rules for local aircrew will be scrapped if their COVID tests are negative. James Reynolds with you on OS. The Queen's death has been marked in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Jamaica, and other Commonwealth countries where Queen Elizabeth was the head of state. Our reporter Khashayat Junaidi from BBC Persian is in Ottawa, in Canada. Khashayat, the Queen visited Canada more than she did any other country. How is she being remembered in Canada?
Absolutely. She's been visiting Canada for 22 times, and people here have fond memories of her visits. I've been watching Canadian TV stations through the past hours, and they're talking to people who have witnessed the Queen's visits, who have hosted her in their homes, in their farms, in their workplaces and stuff like that. And everybody is saying how caring she was and how she talked to them and greeted them, and they were all very respecting their love and respecting their sorrow for her demise. People in Canada have been knowing the Queen for a very long time. As Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, said, she's been the Queen for half of Canada's existence, 70 years. And she's been seen everywhere, on $20 banknotes, on coins, in offices, every place. And what people say here is that her popularity and her image is much more than the monarchy. Actually, it's her presence and her character which had added to the institution of monarchy here in Canada.
What has the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had to say?
Mr. Trudeau yesterday spoke after the announcement, and he expressed sorrow, and he said that he'll miss her more than any other place, and recalled his chats with her and how much that he's going to miss them, and he referred to the Queen as a very thoughtful, wise, and funny person.
And I wonder if it's too soon for conversations in Canada about the kind of future the country might see with King Charles.
Well, that is, but just as the UK, the ascension of Charles III to the throne here in Canada was automatically announced, and he's the king here now, head of state. And the same ceremonies and protocols that are going to be observed in the UK will be observed here by the Canadian government. And like there was questions like, what about like official banknotes or stamps and stuff like that? And the officials are saying that there are no plans for removing the Queen's picture, for instance, from the $20 bill and replacing it with Charles' picture. And also, for one instance, yesterday there was this citizenship ceremony for new people have just become Canadian citizens, and for like some minutes there was like this question of the Pledge of Allegiance. Whose name should they replace the Queen's name? And of course that was replaced by Charles III, and the Pledge of Allegiance was made under his name.
Fascinating to hear that. Hasher Janadi from BBC Persian in Ottawa for the moment. Many thank yous. Well, let's turn to Jamaica now, another realm. A cultural studies scholar in the country says that the death of Queen Elizabeth II will break the sentimentality with which Jamaicans hold the British crown and make it easier for the Caribbean nation to sever its ties with the monarchy. That is a quote in today's edition of Jamaica Gleaner, a news portal in Kingston, Jamaica. Kimone Francis is the senior reporter at Jamaica Gleaner. I wonder, when people see that, is that representative of what people in Jamaica think?
Yes, it is. That is absolutely correct. For the older generation, they would have had a greater sense of connection with the Queen. They would have been, very interested in the monarchy, how things operated, Princess Diana and her story. So there's that sort of sentiment. With the Queen dying, I'm afraid that will sort of break things. It will be much easier for us to move on and into a republic.
Tell us about the conversations that are going on.
So there are several conversations. For younger Jamaicans, there is no mourning. That's just the plain truth. There isn't a feeling of sentiment. For older Jamaicans, there's a sense of respect. Some have actually cried. For younger Jamaicans, they're saying, the Queen's legacy is slavery. It is the generational shackling of an entire race, So there is no mourning there. It's sort of a mixed bag.
And does Jamaica have many thoughts about King Charles III, the new king?
Actually, no. Jamaicans are sort of impatient of getting to republic status, which we should be seeing by 2025. The government is still working out the details, so there's not much conversation around Charles and his ascension to the throne.
Kimone Francis from Jamaica Gleaner, thank you so much for the moment. Well, we turn now to Kenya, where Princess Elizabeth, as she was in 1952, was on a trip representing her father, King George VI. He died while she was away, and she returned to the UK as Queen Elizabeth II. The Treetops Lodge in Aberdare National Park was where the Queen stayed, along with her husband, Prince Philip. That location has become significant because of its link to the Queen. My colleague Anne Soy reports from there.
It's very quiet here. Treetops has been closed down since last year because of the impact of COVID-19, but they opened it up especially because of the news that was received yesterday, and I'm sitting on the rooftop. About 100 meters ahead of me is where the original treetop room where the Queen and her husband stayed here in 1952. She came here a princess. She was Princess Elizabeth on a tour representing her father, the king, and she had come here to central Kenya. It is quite a spectacular view, and it was built just by the trail of the wildlife as they came to drink water from the pond that is in front of me. It's dry at the moment because there's a drought, but they use this trail to come and drink water. And so the tree house had been built on top of a fig tree, which we are told was about 3 centuries old, and it gave the guests a bird's eye view of the wildlife, a wide variety of wildlife. I've seen buffaloes, warthogs, and many others. I am told that the Queen was thrilled by what she saw on that night of 5th February going to the 6th in 1952. However, what she did not know at the time is that her father died in his sleep thousands of miles away in Britain. And so she became queen, but she wasn't aware. It took a while for the communication to get to her. I mean, it was 1952. And so it's after she had departed from here that she learned that she had become queen. It is something that many people like to talk about, and talk about that connection to the royal family. This is where Queen Elizabeth became queen. This is where history, that historic 70-year reign started. It started right here. And so it has been close to people's hearts. And even as the outgoing president, Uhuru Kenyatta, was sending his message, he did talk about it. I'll just read out an excerpt from his message. He says, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a towering icon of selfless service to humanity and a key figurehead of not only the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth of Nations, where Kenya is a member, but the entire world. And he goes on to talk about that history between the royal family, the Queen herself, and Kenya. And later on, the Queen returned here actually in 1983. That time the lodge had been expanded, which is where I am at the moment. And from her room, she could look at that location where she became queen. The tree doesn't exist anymore now. You know, this was a time when change was sweeping across the continent. Some countries were gaining independence from Britain. The Queen, as the head of the Commonwealth, still played a key role in bringing them into the fold of the Commonwealth. She made a historic visit to Ghana, for instance, where she danced with then-President Kwame Nkrumah. I was there a few months ago, and I was informed that he was the first black man she ever danced with in the 50s. It was very rare for that to happen. And so she was a queen who was well ahead of her time.
And so I'm reporting from Kenya, and there is grief in many places across the world, as we are rightly reporting. But as Kimone just told us from Jamaica, the Queen's death is also a moment for many to think about how the UK monarchy as an institution has affected their lives and what they want for the future. On this point, there are mixed views, which we do want to reflect over the course of the next few days of our coverage. We also want to play you in the days ahead a range of messages that we've received.
Good afternoon. Please, my name is Iwo Ohene Danson, of age 11, and a pupil of classes from Ghana. When I heard of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's death, I was shocked. In fact, I couldn't understand. As a sign of respect, I humbly send condolence to the royal family and all Britain. She was the heart of many, a precious person blessed with peace, mercy, and wisdom. Please, I believe King Charles III will help very much in building Britain to the ultimate level, as her mother did. Thank you very much.
Good morning. This is Oliver from Jamaica. We here in the islands are very saddened by the death of the Queen. She has been around us from I know myself, which is 1962 when I was born. But she had lived a good life. Her name was not caught up in any scandals, and this was something that we loved about her. And we do hope her son, Prince Charles III, or King Charles III, will follow his mother's example and just do the right thing and let his name not be caught up in any scandals or any controversies or anything. Thank you.
Messages there from Jamaica and also from Ghana. Well, a little earlier on, I told you about the woman who leant over to give the new king a kiss on the cheek. Reporters have found her. She is Jenny Asimnios. She greeted the king with a kiss on the cheek outside Buckingham Palace, and she has told the media she's very, very happy and proud to have hugged and kissed the new king. And that king will prepare in the next few minutes to deliver his first televised address to this nation. There will also be a service of reflection on the life of his mother at St. Paul's Cathedral. Do stay with the BBC.
This is the BBC World Service.
The breakthroughs that have shaped the way in which we live today.
3, 2, 1,
and liftoff.
We don't do what we do in the space business for personal accomplishment. We do it because it's going to advance knowledge for humanity.
The art that has revolutionized industry.
New York had this incredible explosion of posters, flyers, and being part of that was very exhilarating.
The people who have made a difference.
My song was doing its own journey and was inspiring other people in other places from all over the world.
And the moments that have made history.
10 meters underground, Flight Lieutenant Ken Reese taking part in The Great Escape.
As I'd be digging the tunnel, you'd pull 20 through and go out yourself.
History told by the people who were there. Witness history at bbcworldservice.com/witnesshistory.
Hello, this is James Reynolds, live from the BBC. Welcome to OS. King Charles III has returned to London from Scotland. He's greeted crowds outside Buckingham Palace. He and Camilla, the new Queen Consort, entered the gates of the palace together. On this programme, we will take you through the course of events here in the UK. We will also look back on the life of Queen Elizabeth II, and we will ask what life holds for the new king.
BBC News with Julie Kendler. Britain's new king, Charles III, is preparing to give his first televised address as monarch following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth, on Thursday. Earlier, he returned to London from Balmoral Castle in Scotland and was greeted warmly by a large crowd outside Buckingham Palace. King Charles has held his first audience with Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, while Parliament in Westminster is holding a special session to pay tribute to the Queen. Gun salutes have been fired in cities across the United Kingdom to honour Queen Elizabeth. Bells have rung out at churches around the country, and many sporting events have been called off out of respect. Among the tributes paid by world leaders, President Biden described Queen Elizabeth as a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. China's President Xi Jinping noted that she had been the first British monarch to visit his country and called her death a great loss. In other news, the Global Nuclear Agency has warned the situation at Ukraine's Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is increasingly precarious, with increased shelling making it unlikely that power could be restored. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency said the power infrastructure feeding the nearby city of Enerhodar had been destroyed. A Russian-backed official in occupied Ukraine has admitted the Ukrainian troops have scored a significant victory this week. Ukrainian troops claim to have advanced up to 50 kilometers into Russian-held territory, liberating more than 20 villages along the way. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has described the floods in Pakistan as a climate catastrophe. Speaking in the capital, Islamabad, Mr. Guterres said that helping Pakistan to recover from the disaster caused by climate change was not a matter of generosity, but justice. BBC News.
This is James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC World Service. In about half an hour's time, there will be a service at St Paul's Cathedral here in central London to mark the life of Queen Elizabeth II. And at about the same time, this country will hear from its new king, King Charles III. He will deliver his first televised address to the nation and to the Commonwealth, and we will bring you that speech here on the BBC as we reflect on both the life of the Queen who has died and on the road ahead for the King who has now become the new sovereign. One of the last overseas visits that Charles made before becoming king was to Bucharest in Romania in June this year. He visited the Romexpo Donation Center for Ukrainian refugees. Let's talk now to Cosmina Seaman, the director of this center in Bucharest. Cosmina, thanks so much for joining us. Tell me a bit more about his visit.
Good evening. Actually, Prince Charles, now King Charles, was in Bucharest in June this year, visiting a donation center we are organizing in Romexpo for Ukrainian refugees.
While in Romania we are not so accustomed with the royalties, we expected something very formal and very stiff, let's say. But Prince Charles proved to be a very warm person, and from the general mayor of Bucharest, who greeted him, to the servicing people in the donation center, he spoke with everybody. He shook hands with everybody. He smiled and had a good word for everybody. And he was very, very impressed by the families of Ukrainian ladies who were there with their children. They were coming to pick up some food and some baby items. And Prince Charles spent a lot of time speaking with them and asking about the situation and how they are feeling and if they receive all the help they can get. He also mentioned about the private initiatives and the charities that he's supporting through UK that is also helping Romania, Moldova and Poland in this Ukrainian crisis.
And on that wider point of that Ukrainian crisis, more than 1 million Ukrainians have crossed into the border in Romania. How has life been for them since the start of the war, since they left?
You can imagine how it is to be far away from home without the father of the children in a country that you don't understand the language and you don't even understand the alphabet. It's very difficult for Ukrainian families to live here in Bucharest and in Romania because they are all hoping that the war will end soon and they can go back home. But month after month that is not happening. So you can imagine what it is going through in the heart of those families.
And I've spoken to so many of those people, and my colleagues have as well, over the last few months of that war, since Russia began its invasion in late February. Cosmina Seaman, who remembers now the visits of Prince Charles, as he then was, in June to Romania. Thank you so much. Well, as we reflect on the Queen's life, we want to hear from the rest of this island about memories across this country, in Scotland and also in Wales and deeper into England. A little earlier I spoke to our BBC colleagues who are around the UK. Firstly to Sarah Walker from Radio Berkshire, who's been in Windsor. That is the location of one of the Queen's much-loved residences, Windsor Castle. It's about half an hour's drive in the west of London. And I began by asking Sarah what the atmosphere was like.
Well, it's been such a unique experience to witness Windsor today. I have never seen it like that. There was an incredibly eerie silence when I arrived at about 5 o'clock this morning, and the roads were littered with hushed police officers standing quiet, respectful, heads bowed. And then I turned the corner around by the castle and walked to Cambridge Gate, which is at the top of the Long Walk. It's a really iconic part of Windsor Castle, and it was there that there was a blanket of flowers and tributes, predominantly from local people who placed them there yesterday evening into the night. And at that stage, in the early morning gloom, there were candles, there were tea lights burning brightly, there were pictures of the Queen, there were incredibly touching tributes. And at that moment, really, it was an opportunity for local people to come out and pay their respects. Ironically, it was the joggers, it was the dog walkers who would have often seen the Queen in Windsor Great Park and her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. They would often be seen riding their Range Rovers through the park years ago, riding their horses and ponies, taking their corgis for a walk. People would tell me that often they would stop, they would ask the names of their dogs if they were having fun. One lady, Lucy, said it was in the Great Park that she could just be herself, Elizabeth. And there was a real sense that certainly in the early hours of the morning, around up into 10 o'clock, it was an opportunity for local people to come out and to grieve in their own unique way. And then just before 10 o'clock, things changed. The tourists arrived. Others from around the UK had made their way to Windsor. Smartphones were being held aloft, taking pictures of the floral tributes. And then at 12, the Sebastopol bell rang in the inner sanctum of the Round Tower. Now that was taken from Crimea during the reign of Queen Victoria. It only rings on the death of a monarch every minute for every year of their reign. So Windsor changed throughout the day, And as more people arrived, there were more stories being brought with them. And it was outside the Cambridge Gate that I met Linda, Sammy and Leo from Maidenhead in Berkshire and asked them why they had decided to come and pay their respects.
Just felt we had to, really. I mean, when our husband died, we came. I know it was sort of locked down and whatever. And Leo picked some flowers and we brought them up. And it's just something we need to do.
There's such a different atmosphere here today. Like, you can really feel a difference just walking into Windsor. We were here last week just watching the guard change, and it's so different.
Leo, let me have a chat with you. Let me bend down here. First of all, who've you got in your arms here?
Paddington.
And why have you brought Paddington here?
To show respect.
To show respect. Talk to me about the Queen.
She's done lots of good things for this country.
She was a special lady, wasn't she? Why do you think she was so special, Leo?
She was the Queen.
She was. Thanks so much to Sarah Walker from Radio Berkshire. Well, next on the line we have Ben Phillip from BBC Radio Scotland, where crowds have been gathering outside Balmoral Castle, the secluded residence where the Queen died yesterday. Ben, bring us up to date with what you've seen.
Yes, well, the scene here at the gates of Balmoral today, very calm, peaceful and sombre. Hundreds of people have been arriving to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. A constant stream of well-wishers of all ages and nationalities crossing the bridge over the River Dee, many visibly upset, carrying flowers to lay at the ever-growing floral tributes at the castle gate. Many people I've been speaking with suggest it was somewhat appropriate that the Queen spent her last days here in the place that perhaps loved more than anywhere else. Her affection for Scotland, in her own words, was deep and abiding. Balmoral was a place the Queen could live as close to a normal life. Loved being out in the hills, walking the dogs, riding horses. She had many happy memories here. Now, it wouldn't be uncommon for the Queen to be seen in the nearby villages of Braemar and Ballater during her holidays here in Aberdeenshire. Residents in these areas are extremely protective about the royal family. They respect their privacy. They treat them as neighbours, treat them as one of their own. And there's a feeling of profound sadness here from locals, tourists, and even those who have travelled specifically here just to pay their respects.
It's a time that she obviously means a lot to, so I think the whole feeling's a bit subdued here.
Both of us were saying that she's obviously been the core monarch of our entire lives, and so it's just a bit of a strange change to have to get used to that not being the case anymore.
We're from Worcester, it's 500 miles away, but we're up here on a week's holiday, planning to come and visit Balmoral today. Unfortunately, the events yesterday, we wasn't sure if we'd get here today, but obviously there's a lot of people paying their respects, so that's what we're here to do.
A lot of people that we spoke to trying to get flowers on the way, just said it's sad, and it's a sad day for everyone, really.
Thoughts of people gathered in Scotland outside Balmoral, and our thanks to Ben Phillip from BBC Radio Scotland. Let's cross now to Lucy Vladder from Radio Wales. King Charles, Lucy, of course, was previously the Prince of Wales, a title which will at some point now be passed on to Prince William, his eldest son, now the heir to the throne. Do take us through what's been happening in Wales.
Yes, as you can imagine, a day full of ceremony events like the gun salute here in Cardiff have, of course, been in the planning for years, executed with that classic military precision. But it was also an event open to members of the public, and with that comes very raw, unplanned emotion, and that was demonstrated in the hours before, people queuing outside these huge wooden castle doors from all different backgrounds, some with mixed views of the monarchy, but all wanting to be a part of events today. And there were other events across Wales too. A gun salute also took place at Carnarvon Castle, a place where, as you mentioned, the investiture of the then Prince Charles took place in 1969. Books of condolence have also been opened across the country, and the Senedd, which is the Welsh Parliament, has suspended all its business on Sunday, though an extraordinary session will be held with a motion of condolence for politicians to recognise the Queen's public service and work with many Welsh charities. And as the world's most travelled monarch, Wales is of course a place where the Queen has visited many times. She was last here in October last year for the 6th opening of the Senedd, the place where we know flowers have been laid since last night, and she's been to Wales watching the rugby, visiting Royal Welsh shows, and perhaps the one which is remembered by many in Wales, a visit a week after the Aberfan disaster, where a mountain of coal waste slid down a mountainside, killing more than 100 adults and children. The Queen has been a thread through history, and of course in the coming days there will be further moments of remembrance both here and across the rest of Wales as people find their way to remember her.
Lucy Vladev from BBC Radio Wales, ending that series of reflections from across Britain. This is James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC World Service. Time for a look at a few more stories. Concerns over the increasingly precarious situation at Ukraine's Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant have been raised by the head of the UN's nuclear agency. Rafael Grossi warned that shelling made it unlikely that power could be restored, meaning that the nuclear plant would become totally reliant on emergency diesel generators. Police in Britain have arrested a man in connection with a bomb attack by Irish Republican Army militants in the city of Manchester in June 1996. The man was detained on Thursday night at Birmingham Airport on suspicion of terrorism offences. The attack injured 220 people. The actress Julianne Moore has led a flash mob protest on the Venice Film Festival red carpet in support of filmmakers detained around the world. It's as the Iranian director Jafar Panahi, whose film No Bears is being shown at the event, remains in prison in Tehran, serving a 6-year sentence for promoting propaganda against the Islamic Republic. Now, with a look at all the sports news, here's Shoujo Soccer. Well, James, the world of sport is continuing to pay its respects following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. All professional football in Great Britain and Northern Ireland has been called off this weekend, including the Premier League, of course. Cricket, golf, boxing and rugby union have all rescheduled events and matches. Her Majesty was an ardent fan of horse racing. She was an owner and a breeder as well, and a regular attendee to race meetings. Well, all race meetings across Britain have been cancelled today. There have also been glowing tributes from right across the spectrum of sport, including this from the head of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach.
With the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, we have lost a great supporter of sport and of the Olympic movement. Her Majesty was the only head of state to declare open 2 editions of the Olympic Games and was already present at the Olympic Games London 1948.
At the US Open tennis in New York, Tunisia's Ons Jabeur will take on the world number 1 Iga Świątek in the women's final on Saturday. Jabeur reached the final at Wimbledon 2 this year, and she says that good goal setting has really helped her have her best ever year.
Saying out loud what I want to do is part of me achieving things. I remember saying that I want to be a top 5. I wanted to win a Grand Slam, and I wanted to qualify for the Masters. You know, to check. There is one more. It's going to check hopefully soon.
In the men's semi-finals today, it'll be Norway's Casper Ruud versus Russia's Karen Khachanov, and the Spanish teenager Carlos Alcaraz versus the American Francis Tiafoe. Thanks so much to Shoujo. James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC. To Ukraine, where the head of the UN nuclear agency, Rafael Grossi, has warned that the situation at Ukraine's Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is increasingly precarious. Shelling makes it unlikely that power can be restored. Mr. Grossi said that shelling had caused a complete power blackout in the city of Enerhodar, compromising the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant and the plant's staff. A little earlier, I spoke to our correspondent, Bethany Bell, for the latest.
Mr. Grossi says this is a dramatic development which significantly increases the risk of a nuclear accident. He said that because of this complete power blackout, the plant operator isn't confident that they can restore reliable off-site power, and that they're considering switching off the remaining reactor, and that would make the nuclear plant totally reliant on emergency diesel generators. And Mr. Grossi said that this was a completely unacceptable situation which could not stand, and he called for the shelling to stop immediately.
he of course makes those calls, Bethany. Is there any sense that he might have the influence to have those calls heard?
It's very difficult to know exactly what the response will be at the moment. Earlier this week, he called for the creation of what he called a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the plant. He repeated that call again today. He didn't say who was responsible for the shelling today, but said it had to stop. Russia and Ukraine have blamed each other. Russia, in its response to the IAEA's report earlier this week, which called for this protection zone, said it needed more answers from the IAEA, and Ukraine has said that they needed more details as to what such a zone could look like, and they were critical, saying that they needed more clarity from the IAEA. So it's hard to see at the moment exactly what the willingness will be of the two sides, but certainly from the IAEA's perspective, they see this as a very serious situation.
Bethany Bell reporting. This is James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC World Service. Here in central London, at St Paul's Cathedral, politicians and members of the public are gathering at the cathedral in the pews for a service of thanksgiving and reflection on the life of Queen Elizabeth II. The pews in the cathedral, as I look at the pictures, are full. The Prime Minister is there, the Leader of the Opposition is there, and ordinary members of the public who got wristbands are also there as well. With me in the studio is Rob Watson, and when you look at this service, Rob, this is really the first in a series of public gatherings and remembrances over a long series of days of national mourning.
Yes, absolutely. We're looking at those gathered in St Paul's, prominent politicians, as you say, also ordinary members of the public, and absolutely. I mean, I think the important thing is, and this is not by chance, by the way, James, there is going to be 10 days of orchestrated, organised, but also, to some extent, impromptu outpouring of remembrance for the Queen. It's going to feature things such as the Queen lying in state in Westminster Hall in Parliament, which I think was going to be an enormous moment. I think those 4 days when the public are allowed to pass by, could be more than 1 million people, it will culminate in the Queen's funeral in about 10 days' time.
So at that point here in London, and I know the Queen's body will also be displayed in Edinburgh, there will be that real sense of the public having an ability to file past her coffin.
Yes, and I think there was something like, I think there were around about 250,000 people, 300,000 people filed by the coffin of her father, King George. I mean, it's expected that there could be over 1 million. I mean, there are plans being made to have a line, or queue as we call it in the UK, going from Parliament all the way along the River Thames, over Vauxhall Bridge. I mean, that's the kind of outpouring, that's the kind of affection, levels of affection expected to be shown.
Rob, I just want to give our audience a sense of the service which is about to start in St Paul's Cathedral, a remembrance of the life of Queen Elizabeth II. And in a few minutes' time, that service will begin in St Paul's Cathedral. And on this programme, on the BBC, in recent hours, we have reported on the grief that people have felt about the death of the Queen. I have seen that grief, that sense of mourning, from people laying flowers outside Buckingham Palace. The Queen's death is also a moment for many people in different countries to think about how the UK monarchy as an institution affects their lives and what they might want for the future. On this point, there are mixed views, and we do want to reflect these views over the course of the next few days of our coverage. We also want to play a range of messages we've received.
Hello, this is Rizwan Amayo from Lahore, Pakistan. I want to contribute something that it's a sad day for the world. that the people of the world consider the Queen a mother, and Queen is a role model for many millions of people living in this world. She has a good memories with everyone living in England, and she often visited different countries, and people have experiences, with her, and she is playing a role for the betterment of humanity. Now the new king, the Prince Charles, everybody has a eye on him, that he will maintain balance in this world, maintain peace.
This is Usman Kamara from the Gambia, West Africa. It's a shocking loss to the people of Britain and to the world in general anyway. We're sorry. We pray that the good God give them comfort to bear their loss. There have been mixed reactions here in the Gambia. Some have been calling, well, it's time now for a government of Britain to return the diamond from Africa that is on the Queen's crown, So all these comments are coming up anyway, because some people are really sad about the invasion, some are not, because some are saying because they've seen an underdeveloped nations that were colonized by the British, and there's not much has been done for them. Some are moved, some are not moved by her death, and some are say, okay, it's her time, and I will wish her all the best, and may God grant her heaven. And so we're here with mixed reactions, and nothing more, nothing less.
We here in Barbados are celebrating the life and the loss of Her Majesty the Queen. As you guys would know, we are the youngest republic, but nevertheless, we in Barbados are still carrying out the traditions, because the flags at Gaba House, which was named Gaba House, no State House, has been lowered to half mast. We are still not part of the royal family, but we are still paying our respects in Barbados.
Paying respects in Barbados there, Rob. And in the next few days, we will hear a range of voices talking about that institution of the monarchy, but we're obviously struck by the fact that for the Queen herself, there was great affection for many people for the life of a 96-year-old.
Yes, absolutely. And if you look at this country, overwhelmingly people like the Queen. I mean, I was checking all the statistics and the surveys over the summer at the time of her Platinum Jubilee, and something like 75% of people like the Queen. Particularly high the older you get. 62% less support the idea of the monarchy. So there's clearly the idea that the Queen herself, partly her age, her longevity, she's more popular, I think, than the institution. And I think there will undoubtedly be people reflecting in this country and beyond as to whether does constitutional monarchy make sense in the early part of the 21st century, and maybe some people around the world will question whether you should still have a British monarch as the head of state. But I think if one sort of sits back and reflects, I mean, you can say very uncontroversially that yes, the Queen was not universally popular in the United Kingdom, but my goodness, by any normal standards, she was immensely popular.
Rob Watson, our correspondent, thank you so much. Well, in St Paul's Cathedral, the mourners have gathered. The mourners, including the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition and the Mayor of London, and people have been queuing for that service since the early afternoon. Bags have been searched, and strangers are chatting, reflecting on why the Queen was important to them. Sylvia Usher has told one of my colleagues that she was in the crowds for the Queen's coronation back in 1953. Sylvia was just a little girl back then, but says she remembers it being a magical day. It was a special moment in my life that I will never forget, she's told the BBC. I was there at the moment she started her reign, and I'd also like to say goodbye to her too at the end of that reign. And in a few minutes' time as well, the new king, Charles III, will deliver his first address to this nation, the first chance that this nation and other countries will have a chance to hear from him personally. This has been an address which has been long planned. The first words to this country as king. We have already seen King Charles III earlier in the day as he walked through Buckingham Palace, as he shook hands, as a woman even kissed him on the cheek as he tried to set the tone for the reign that has already begun, the reign that is now in its first full day, as mourners now gather in St. Paul's Cathedral to remember the life of his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. I'm James Reynolds. You've been listening to OS on the BBC World Service.
With bbc.com/news, you get the latest news stories anytime you like. Whether you're interested in science, health, technology or business, the bbc.com/news website can offer it all. It also gives you the opportunity to listen live to our news output or check the latest breaking news with our minute-by-minute news feed. All this content, coverage and opportunity makes the BBC the world leader in news coverage online. bbc.com/news.
This is the BBC World Service, and on our website you can explore more of our programmes, from documentaries to science. Listen and download at any time by going to bbcworldservice.com. On air, online and on smartphone, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to OS with me, James Reynolds, live from the BBC. The first full day of the reign of King Charles III is underway. The country's new monarch flew down from Balmoral in Scotland. The King, along with Camilla, the new Queen Consort, shook hands with well-wishers outside Buckingham Palace. The royal couple walked slowly along the gates of the palace, stopping to look at cards written in sympathy for the death yesterday of Queen Elizabeth II. As the new king entered the palace, the royal standard was flown from the roof of the building. It is the only flag in the country which will currently be flown at full mast. It is a striking sight. One sovereign dies, the new sovereign begins the next reign without pause. Right now, a service of thanksgiving for the Queen's life is taking place at St. Paul's Cathedral. The new king is making his first televised address.
Hello, this is Julie Candler with the BBC News. Britain's new king is addressing the people of the United Kingdom at a service of prayer and reflection for his late mother, Queen Elizabeth. King Charles travelled back to London today from Balmoral Castle in Scotland on the first day of mourning for the Queen, who died on Thursday after 70 years on the throne. Naomi Grimley reports.
King Charles III is now addressing the nation in his first televised speech as monarch. His task is to articulate both public and private grief, whilst also ushering in a new era in British history. Earlier, crowds greeted him as he arrived at Buckingham Palace with his wife, the Queen Consort. A service of remembrance is in progress at St. Paul's Cathedral, where a single bell has been tolling to mark the passing of the sovereign.
Acts of mourning for Queen Elizabeth are continuing. Thousands of people have gathered at royal palaces to lay flowers and to pay their personal respects. Earlier, gun salutes and church bells sounded around the country. The new British Prime Minister, Liz Truss, led tribute to the late Queen in a special sitting of the House of Commons.
On the death of her father, King George VI, Winston Churchill said the news had stilled the clatter and traffic of 20th century life in many lands. Now, 70 years later, in the tumult of the 21st century, life has paused again. Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, was one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known.
The leader of the opposition Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, praised the Queen as the best of us.
Queen Elizabeth created a special personal relationship with us all. That relationship was built on the attributes that defined her reign. Her total commitment to service and duty. Her deep devotion to the country, the commonwealth, and the people she loved.
World leaders past and present have been reflecting on the Queen's legacy. President Biden described her as a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. China's President Xi Jinping noted that she had been the first British monarch to visit his country and called her death a great loss. The Ugandan leader Yoweri Museveni said the Queen had witnessed the huge metamorphosis of the political landscape in the world, and he praised her efforts at reconciliation. Football fans in Britain say an opportunity to pay tribute to the Queen has been lost with the cancellation of all matches over the weekend. Boxing, rugby union and horse racing are among other sports affected. There was no play today in cricket's test match between England and South Africa, but it will resume on Saturday. World News from the BBC. A Russian-backed official in occupied Ukraine has admitted that Ukrainian troops have scored a significant victory this week. Ukrainian troops claim to have advanced up to 50 kilometers into Russian-held territory, liberating more than 20 villages. This would put them within striking distance of Kupiansk, a strategically important town with a railway line which Russia uses to supply its troops. The head of the UN Nuclear Agency has warned the situation at Ukraine's Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is increasingly precarious as shelling continues. Rafael Grossi said the energy infrastructure feeding the nearby city of Enerhodar had been destroyed. Bethany Bell reports.
Mr. Grossi said the plant operator was not confident that reliable off-site power could be restored and was considering switching off the remaining reactor. That would make the nuclear plant totally reliant on emergency diesel generators. Mr. Grossi said this was a dramatic development which significantly increased the risk of a nuclear accident. He repeated his call for the creation of a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the plant. He didn't say which side was responsible for the shelling, but said it must stop immediately.
Power generating companies in the European Union could see their profits capped in an effort to keep down household bills. The proposal was made at a meeting of EU energy ministers in Brussels. It was convened in an effort to reach agreement on how to deal with the rapidly rising cost of gas and electricity. Hong Kong has taken a first step towards easing tough COVID rules for airlines, which have damaged its role as a hub for international flights. The government says that from Saturday, quarantine rules for local aircrew will be scrapped if their COVID tests are negative. Dozens of airlines have stopped operating in the Chinese territory. BBC News.
This is James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC World Service. We are covering the first full day of the reign of King Charles III. He has returned to London, to Buckingham Palace. The new king is making his first address to the nation.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration, an example to me and to all my family. And we owe her the most heartfelt debt any family could owe to their mother, for her love, affection, guidance, understanding, and example. Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today. Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude for the more than 70 years in which my mother, as Queen, served the people of so many nations. In 1947, on her 21st birthday, she pledged in a broadcast from Cape Town to the Commonwealth to devote her life, whether it be short or long, to the service of her peoples. That was more than a promise. It was a profound personal commitment which defined her whole life. She made sacrifices for duty. Her dedication and devotion to sovereign never wavered through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss. In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations. The affection, admiration, and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign. And, as every member of my family can testify, she combined these qualities with warmth, humor, and an unerring ability always to see the best in people. I pay tribute to my mother's memory, and I honor her life of service. I know that her death brings great sadness to so many of you, and I share that sense of loss beyond measure with you all. When the Queen came to the throne, Britain and the world were still coping with the privations and aftermath of the Second World War, and still living by the conventions of earlier times. In the course of the last 70 years, we have seen our society become one of many cultures and many faiths. The institutions of the state have changed in turn. But through all changes and challenges, our nation and the wider family of realms, of whose talents, traditions, and achievements I am so inexpressibly proud, have prospered and flourished. Our values have remained, and must remain, constant. The role and the duties of monarchy also remain, as does the sovereign's particular relationship and responsibility towards the Church of England, the church in which my own faith is so deeply rooted. In that faith and the values it inspires, I have been brought up to cherish a sense of duty to others, and to hold in the greatest respect the precious traditions, freedoms, and responsibilities of our unique history and our system of parliamentary government. As the Queen herself did with such unswerving devotion, I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. And wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavor to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life. My life will, of course, change as I take up my new responsibilities. It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply. But I know this important work will go on in the trusted hands of others. This is also a time of change for my family. I count on the loving help of my darling wife, Camilla. In recognition of her own loyal public service since our marriage 17 years ago, she becomes my Queen Consort. I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely so much. As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades. Today, I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear. during so much of my life and duty. With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground, where vital help can be given. I want also to express my love for Harry and Meghan as they continue to build their lives overseas. In a little over a week's time, we will come together as a nation, as a commonwealth, and indeed a global community, to lay my beloved mother to rest. In our sorrow, let us remember and draw strength from the light of her example. On behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most sincere and heartfelt thanks for your condolences and support. They mean more to me than I can ever possibly express. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
The first address of King Charles III to the nation, reflecting on the long life of his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, reflecting also on the journey ahead for him as king, with his queen, consort Camilla, and the role for his elder son, Prince William, who will one day become king himself, and who now inherits the title Prince of Wales. With me in the studio is our correspondent, Naomi Grimley. Your thoughts on that speech, the first time the country has heard from him as king?
Indeed, and it was a very moving speech, particularly that last bit at the end that I think will be the bit that makes headlines when he addresses his dead mother. To my darling Mama, as you begin your journey to meet our late Papa, I want to say thank you. May flights of angels sing you to your rest. So a very stirring end there, but also interesting things that are happening. He mentions that Prince William will now become the Prince of Wales, so he's taking on the title that his father had before him. Also, there was an acknowledgement from the king that his life is going to change. I know my life will change, and the time I have spent on charities and issues will have to now be put in the trusted hands of others. So perhaps a recognition that he'll become less of a controversial figure and more of a unifying monarch.
And the nation did get to know him over many decades as someone who did give interviews, who advocated for various causes. He hated modern architecture, or some parts of modern architecture. He spoke volubly about the environment, but he also gave an interview some time ago saying he wouldn't speak in public about those causes dear to his heart so much. Is this now how we will hear from him, speeches without so much engagement on certain issues?
Yes, I think that was an elegant way of him saying that he will now be above politics, that he won't make his views known. Even recently, we know what he thought, for example, about the UK government's policy on sending asylum seekers to Rwanda. But from now on, he's really trying to reassure people that he will be an impartial figure above politics. He also pledged himself to parliamentary democracy, to defend that, and to the Church of England, because, of course, another of his roles is Supreme Governor of the Anglican Church.
I want to bring in our religion editor, Aleem Makbul, there, because Naomi was just mentioning the Church of England and the fact that the sovereign is the Supreme Governor. What role does that play for King Charles?
Well, the role it played, and I think as Naomi was saying, a lot of that speech was about reassurance that there will be continuity. And the way the Queen carried out that role, by all accounts, certainly from people who worked with her in the Church of England, was that that was something that she saw as much more than constitutional duty. It was something that guided the way she lived her life. But the way she did it in terms of the Supreme Governor of the Church of England was to allow the bishops to do the governance part, and for her to be a listening ear whenever they required it. I remember hearing a really moving account that was given by Lord John Sensmore, who was the former Archbishop of York. He said that when he was going through a troubled time, when he was having difficulty over an issue, he requested an audience with the Queen, and that she listened, she questioned, and then ultimately told him over this issue that he should go with his heart. And he said at the end of that meeting, "Would you pray for me?" And he said the Queen just put her hands around his and didn't say a word for 3 minutes, and then just said Amen. And he just talked about how he felt he was in the company of someone who is humble and holy. And I think the message we got there from the King was that he would clearly take that role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England extremely seriously and continue his mother's good work.
Aleem Maqbool, our religion editor, thank you so much for the moments. Well, across London, from where we are now, a service of prayer and reflection is taking place in St Paul's Cathedral as the country remembers the life of Queen Elizabeth II. Let's hear some of that service. The hymn, "Behold, O God, our Defender." Service being held in St Paul's Cathedral, attended by the Prime Minister, by politicians, and also by members of the public. A reflection on the life of the Queen, whose faith, as Aleem Maqbool was just telling us, was so important. And when it comes to the new king, Aleem, many people remember an interview he gave almost 30 years ago in which he talked about this moment of becoming king. There's an ancient title, Defender of the Faith. And he suggested in that interview he wanted to be called Defender of Faith, without revert. Take us through that.
Well, he wasn't saying he necessarily wanted to be called that, but he said that's how he saw the role, that it was Defender of Faith. But actually, that was how the Queen saw the role too. She might not have said it in quite that way, but she said throughout her reign, actually, that she believed that Anglicanism was about protecting the practice of all faiths. And she said many times her belief, her faith, had taught her to respect people of all religions and none as well. And we're seeing that reflected in the kind of tributes that we're seeing now from across the faith spectrum, from people within other faiths in this country but around the world, that they somehow felt included. And again, I'm going to refer to somebody I met just a couple of months ago. I went to see a man who presented a Quran to the Queen in Scunthorpe Mosque, the very first mosque that she visited. And she visited there in the months after the 9/11 attacks. So this man was saying that was a time when there was fear, when there was division, and that was a time when he said they needed somebody the community needed somebody to say, look, you belong here too. And he said that came in the form of the Queen.
And we would always hear from the Queen once a year on her Christmas speech, and it was always striking, if one had forgotten the previous speech, just how much religion the Queen would mention, how much her faith was important to her in an overt way in those speeches, which would last for 4 or 5 minutes. When you look at the new king and the mentions of faith, how frequent do you get a sense that that will be?
I think we got a sense there about, he talked about how deeply rooted in the Church of England his own faith was. And it was interesting. That was the one time in the year where we got real insights into the way, as Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, put it earlier today, the Queen was guided by her faith hour by hour, day by day. And there was a sense there that King Charles feels the same way.
And it was striking Naomi Grimley, our correspondent with us in the studio, that in the speech King Charles talked about faith, talked about many things, and also talked about that younger generation. His two sons talked about Prince William now inheriting that title of Prince of Wales, and also talked about his love for Harry and Meghan. And anyone who has lived in this country, who's perhaps followed royal news, has maybe followed some of the more difficult stories about relations within that family. Was this an attempt by the new king to smooth over some of those recent troubles with the newer generation?
Yes, I think it was, very much so, because obviously there's been this sense of alienation. It's spilled over into the media. It's been rather unfortunate for the whole family. So I think it was important that the king gave them a name check, as it were. One of the unfortunate things about the royal family, we talk about an heir and a spare, is that the younger generations, those that aren't in line to the throne, do often feel sidelined. And so by saying that he wanted to put on the record his love for Harry and Meghan, he was trying to make them feel included after what has been, a troublesome few years when it comes to relations and rows about, say, their security detail being funded by the UK government or not. So I think that was very important. But at the same time, William now is Prince of Wales. So that is going to be a very important step up for him as he takes on many of the duties that his father has held.
What does it involve, that job?
Well, there's obviously the huge connection to Wales itself. When we actually get an investiture, that will happen in Cardiff, at St David's, and that will be an incredibly important moment. It's obviously important for the Union, keeping Wales as an important part of the United Kingdom. And so, that was a very significant moment. I think the other thing that's worth bearing in mind is how many echoes there were in this speech to the speech that the Queen had made on her 21st birthday of pledging herself. And this time it was the King pledging himself. I solemnly pledge myself with the remaining time that God grants me. So again, that sense of being a servant of the people, being a servant of God.
Thank you, Naomi. We want to take our audience back to the service, which is taking place in St Paul's Cathedral in remembrance of Queen Elizabeth II, and the hymn, Bring Us, O Lord God, at Our Last Awakening. Bring us, O Lord God, at our last awakening. The hymn sung in St Paul's Cathedral had a service of prayer and reflection in St Paul's Cathedral as the country remembers Queen Elizabeth II. This is OS on the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, bringing you daily news about money and work.
The people who wants to come to Japan are people who wants to do business, and we're shutting these fans out.
Very difficult to find people who wants to work in industry.
The Russian currency is declining, so doing business in Russia becomes very hard, actually.
People were really proud about this kind of technology and surveillance that was going to be in there, but at that point the camp didn't have running water.
Stories from around the globe about the sufferings and successes of business.
The video call interview is being used at all levels, at all roles. In fact, I just accepted a very big job in Dubai.
Shipping in this case has sided with the international conservation groups.
The pandemic has helped us because it has given us the opportunity to replace the roof on this building.
We're hoping that by producing chocolate here, we can make sure that the producers benefit the most from this culture.
Business Daily on the BBC World Service.
Hello, this is James Reynolds, live from the BBC. Welcome to OS. King Charles III has just paid tribute to his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, in an address to the nation. The King has spoken of his feelings of profound sorrow. He says she was an inspiration and an example to him and to his family. He says that hers was a life well lived. We will bring you continuing coverage here on the BBC.
BBC News with Julie Candler. Britain's new King, Charles III, has given his first address to the nation since the death on Thursday of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. He said he was speaking with feelings of profound sorrow. He expressed his wish to renew today his mother's promise at the start of her reign and pledged to serve with respect, honour and love. Earlier, large crowds welcomed King Charles outside Buckingham Palace on his return from Scotland. On a 15-minute walkabout, he shook hands with members of the public. Some sang God Save the King. Streams of mourners have been paying their respects at royal residences. Bells rang out and guns saluted the Queen. King Charles has held his first audience with Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and Parliament has been holding a special session of condolence. There's been a cascade of global tributes to Queen Elizabeth. President Biden described her as a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy. The White House confirmed that Mr. Biden would attend the funeral. In other news, the Global Nuclear Agency has warned the situation at Ukraine's Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is increasingly precarious, with increased shelling making it unlikely that power could be restored. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency said the power infrastructure feeding the nearby city of Enerhodar had been destroyed. A Russian-backed official in occupied Ukraine has admitted that Ukrainian troops have scored a significant victory this week. Ukrainian troops claim to have advanced up to 50 kilometers into Russian-held territory. Colombia and Venezuela say they will reopen their border for cargo transport and flights later this month. After years of tensions over political and ideological differences, Colombia's new left-wing president said the move marked a step towards the normalization of relations. BBC News.
This is James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC World Service. King Charles III is on the first full day of his reign. A few minutes ago, he delivered his first televised address, a tribute to his mother and the service that she paid to the nation. And across this capital, in St Paul's Cathedral, a service of prayer and reflection is taking place in memory of the late Queen Elizabeth II. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is doing a reading from Romans chapter 14, verses 7 to 12.
We do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord.
And if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, so that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. Why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Or you, why do you despise your brother or sister? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall give praise to God. So then, each of us will be accountable to God.
The Prime Minister of the UK, Liz Truss, with a reading at that service, the service of thanksgiving for the life of the late Queen Elizabeth II. With me still is our religion editor, Aleem Maqbool. It's interesting, isn't it, Aleem? In London and in other parts of the UK, we can often just walk past places of worship which are sometimes empty, or sometimes people don't give them a second thought. Yet, at this national time of mourning and grief, these places suddenly become focal points for grief. It's really been quite moving hearing from people from places of worship across the country about the way that people spontaneously, on hearing the news yesterday, walked into their church, or their mosque, or their synagogue, or their temple. And today, at midday on Friday in the UK, the Church of England encouraged churches up and down the country to toll their bells for a full hour and open their doors. And actually I was at an historic church on the edge of Trafalgar Square, St Martin in the Fields. As the bells started to toll, people walked in their droves. And there was a huge line of people to sign the condolence book in the church. Churches across this country have got condolence books as well. And speaking to people, it was about wanting to do something. I mean, for some people it is going to Buckingham Palace and laying a bouquet of flowers. For others, they felt they had sort of marked the moment by going into a church, by saying a prayer for the Queen, by signing a condolence book. And there are going to be faith services of thanksgiving, remembrance, reflection, right across the country over the next 10 days, certainly. But we've already heard of special services in synagogues and in gurdwaras, and that there will be special prayers. There have been special prayers, Friday prayers at mosques across this country. And again, that's a reflection of the way in which the Queen, and we heard it in speeches even during the pandemic, was inclusive, respected people of all faiths. That service in St Paul's Cathedral continues. The Bishop of London, the Right Reverend and Right Honourable Sarah Mullally, has been giving an address.
A life lived in the service of others is a rare jewel. It is a jewel that Her late Majesty the Queen wore as a crown. Today we gather in this cathedral church with those across our nation, the Commonwealth and the world, with a profound sadness as we mourn her death. In doing so, we mark and celebrate the life of an extraordinary which was dedicated to others. During her coronation at Westminster Abbey, almost 70 years ago, the young Queen was anointed before God. With sesame and olive oil, containing orange flowers, roses, jasmine, cinnamon and musk, her life was set apart for the service of others. This act of anointing was so sacred that she was hidden from view and covered by a golden canopy, a rare moment of privacy in a life to be lived in full view of millions.
Her Majesty's sense of vocation and calling was not something she could pick up and put down again. It was deeply embedded in her understanding of herself. In the spirit of our reading from St. Paul's letters to the Romans, she did not live to herself, nor has she died to herself. Most of us have not known life without the Queen. When she ascended to the throne, the world and the country were both very different places. For 7 decades, Her Majesty remained a remarkable constant in the lives of millions, a symbol of unity, strength, forbearance and resilience. She has been this nation's unerring heartbeat through times of progress, joy and celebration, as well as in much darker and more difficult seasons. In a message released on Ascension Day, she wrote, "In this special year, as I dedicate anew to your service, I hope we will be reminded of the power of togetherness and the convening strength of family, friendship, and good neighbourliness. As we mourn her loss, give thanks for her life, and reorientate ourselves as individuals and a nation to life without Her Majesty, may her words remind us of the power and strength to be found in coming together. All of us are grieving the loss of our head of state, head of commonwealth, and supreme governor of the Church of England. But the royal family are grieving the loss of a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. How we learn to live with the death of a loved one differs for each one of us. But we must all find a way to grieve. As the theologian Tom Wright said, not to grieve, not to lament, is to slam the door on the same place in the innermost heart from which love itself comes. We may not know the power of that love until the moment of loss. For as the writer Khalil Gibran wisely observes, love knows not its own depth until the hour of separation. When we are bereaved, we need to make opportunities individually and together to face and absorb the depth of our loss. Yet we are also invited into the healing love of God, which never falters, and which is the deepest and widest perspective of our lives. It is a perspective beautifully expressed by the writer of Deuteronomy, who tells us that underneath are the everlasting arms. Even in the midst of our grief, we are enfolded in that all-encompassing love. As a Christian, I believe that death is not the end. That gives me hope, even in the worst of times. To speak of hope is not to deny the fear, the loss, and the anguish which death brings. Jesus himself stood with Martha and Mary at the tomb of his beloved friend Lazarus and wept, wholly undone by grief. But in that cameo, we have the assurance of God's presence in the world's pain, and a model for our response to human suffering. God is there for us, and we are called to be there for others. The word of the prophet Isaiah assures us that the Spirit of the Lord is at work and will bind up the brokenhearted, comfort those who mourn, and give them a garland instead of ashes, and the oil of gladness instead of mourning. Her Majesty had a remarkable Christian faith, about which she had increasingly spoken in recent years, referring to Jesus Christ as her anchor and role model. Here in this cathedral church, on the 3rd of June, we join to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee. The Archbishop of York spoke of her faith in Jesus Christ as a fountain and a well upon which she drew deeply and by which she was replenished through the challenges and joys of life. If Christ was her anchor, her husband, the late Prince Philip, in her own words was Her Majesty's strength and stay. Yet even in the depths of her own mourning, we saw once again her courage and her instinct for putting the needs of others first. At her coronation all those years ago, she walked up the aisle of Westminster Abbey, straight past the throne, and knelt at the high altar in silent prayer. She gave her allegiance to God before anyone gave allegiance to her. The depth, the breadth, and the generosity of Her Majesty's self-giving in service was an extraordinary gift, and I am certain it has gladdened God's heart. No words can encompass how much we owe Her late Majesty the Queen. She will be profoundly and greatly missed. My prayers are with the royal family at this time, that they may know in the midst of their loss that underneath are the everlasting arms. In the words of Simeon, when after a long life lived in faithfulness he met with God incarnate, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. Amen.
Listening to a service of prayer and reflection which is taking place in St Paul's Cathedral, central London, as the country remembers Queen Elizabeth II. A few moments ago, we just heard the Right Reverend Sarah Mullally, the Bishop of London, with an address at a service in which she talked about the Queen's long service to the country. This is James Reynolds with you on OS from the BBC World Service.
Our correspondent, Naomi Grimley, is with me in the studio. And Naomi, looking at those pictures of the service in the last few minutes, it is striking that many are simply members of the public who queued up this afternoon for tickets.
Indeed, it's very different to what a service might have looked like when the Queen's father had died. I mean, there are many people dressed in black, but there are also many people dressed in ordinary clothes who've obviously queued to get a ticket. We're looking at a congregation of about 2,000 people there. And that sense of reflecting a very diverse country was something that Prince Charles talked about earlier. Obviously, this is a Christian service we've been listening to, but he said, whatever may be your background and beliefs, I shall endeavour to serve you with loyalty, respect and love. So this is a monarchy that understands it's representing a different society to perhaps the one that the Queen took over in 1952.
We also heard the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, do a reading from Romans. And as I said a little earlier in the programme, this country is still getting used to her voice, as well as the voice of the new king. And I've seen that this may even be the first time that a Prime Minister and a monarch have changed office in the same year, let alone the same week. So Britain is getting used to two new leaders, a head of state and a head of government, at the same time.
It really has been quite an extraordinary week, and for Liz Truss to have been put in as Prime Minister just on Tuesday and then on Thursday to be dealing with this huge global story, well, it's certainly a roller coaster. I mean, we've known for a while that the Queen's health has not been particularly good, so there were clearly plans, but nevertheless, it's an enormous responsibility for any Prime Minister to have to speak for the nation and encapsulate the sense of mourning there is.
And I don't think it's unfair at the moment to say that in recent days there has been footage of Liz Truss as a student when she was talking about the fact that she was against the monarchy. She was against people having positions from the time they were born. She has said recently she was just young, she was just a student. But it is remarkable to see footage of someone who, when they were a student, saying there should be no monarchy, and now someone who is playing the leading political role in this profoundly royal and monarchist moment for the state.
Absolutely, and something so rooted in British history. I mean, tomorrow Liz Truss will also take part in the Accession Council. This will take place on Saturday, the first televised Accession Council in history. This will be where King Charles is officially proclaimed king, and the councillors, the privy councillors, so this will be politicians past and present, will gather at St James's Palace. They've actually had to prune down the number because of health and safety concerns. There are too many privy councillors to fit in. But we'll see this very old-fashioned proclamation where they'll blow trumpets and proclaim him king, even though he's king already, of course. But that official ceremony, as you say, Liz Truss will be a key part of it. And yet, as a student firebrand, she did believe in the abolition of the monarchy.
And it was interesting seeing politicians and former prime ministers delivering their tributes in Parliament, all dressed in black. A very memorable image from those politicians, including talks from Theresa May, Boris Johnson.
Absolutely. Boris Johnson delivered a very good, well-judged speech, actually. It's not just me saying that. Members of the opposition also pointed it out. He referred, there was a line I liked where he referred to the fact that she didn't like, the Queen didn't like to be seen as too grand, so she had an electric bar fire, which she used to put on to heat her room. She also, we were talking about this yesterday, she used to have Tupperware containers, plastic containers, to eat her food at picnics. So that was something he picked up on, and he called her Elizabeth the Great. So that will be something else, I think, that will get headlines tomorrow. Of course, Boris Johnson probably prepared that speech thinking one day he was going to deliver it as Prime Minister. In the end, he delivered it from the back benches. But as I say, it was well judged and praised by other politicians across the House.
And Naomi, when you look at the schedule for the next few days, will there be a chance for more people in this country to see the new king?
Absolutely. I mean, we were talking earlier about the importance of William becoming Prince of Wales, and for the King being King of all 4 nations of the UK is really important. So he will be travelling to Scotland, to Wales, to Northern Ireland. It's very important to him that the Union, of course, is at the heart of the monarchy, and he wants to be seen very much as a unifying figure, particularly in the age where Scottish independence is still very much a live question in British politics.
And as you've talked us through the next few stages, there's that proclamation, and there are the days of national mourning, and then there is the official state funeral for the Queen, and then at some point after that there will be a coronation. Looking in historical terms, when does a coronation tend to happen?
So if you look back to the last Queen, she ascended the throne in February of 52, but she didn't have a coronation till June 53. Now that might partly have been because, it was the post-war era, there was still rationing, there were various logistical things to be seen to. But I suspect we're still looking at several months. It is a huge undertaking to have a coronation. The planning behind it, even though of course these plans have been in the pipeline for a while, nevertheless, it will be a matter of months, not weeks.
A little earlier in the office, we were all speaking about the little things that are going to change in this country. There are lawyers, for example, barristers, who had the name Queen's Counsel. They've all become King's Counsel overnight, and some of them have been changing those nominals on their social media pages. We were thinking about post boxes and so on. Can you take us through some of those little things that are going to change here in the UK?
Well, of course, the money will change. That's probably the most fundamental thing. And think of the vast majority of the British population are used to just seeing her face on the coinage and the banknotes, and so that's a huge thing. Even a theatre in the West End that's known as Her Majesty's Theatre, that name will now change to His Majesty's Theatre. It is, a really interesting thing about the continuity of the monarchy, and you mentioned it earlier that the Royal Standard is never flown at half-mast, that you have these transitions, and that because she's lived for so long, we are used to seeing her names, her initials, ER, on everything from post boxes to, formal tax revenue statements that might come through the post, that kind of thing. But all of that will now change. It will, of course, be CR, not ER.
Naomi Grimley, our correspondent, thank you so much. A reminder just now of the words that the new King delivered in his first televised address. In tribute to his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, he spoke of his feelings of profound sorrow, said she was an inspiration and that hers was a life well lived. This has been OS on the BBC World Service with me, James Reynolds. A service of prayer and reflection has been taking place in St Paul's Cathedral as the country remembers Queen Elizabeth II. We leave you with the hymn, "The Lord is my Shepherd."
This is the BBC World Service.
Science. It's observation and discovery.
These are supermassive black hole mergers, the most violent events in the universe.
It answers those weird and wonderful questions. What is the most slippery thing in the world?
What are snails actually good for, if anything?
Are children and teenagers more prone to boredom than adults?
Yes.
Science. On the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, and on our website you can explore more of our programmes from documentaries to science. Listen and download at any time by going to bbcworldservice.com. On air, online and on smartphone, this is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.